On April 28, 1988, Aloha Airlines Flight 243 took off from Hilo International Airport in Hawaii on its way to Honolulu. This plane had to cover this distance in less than 1 hour. Everything was going just fine, and the weather was perfectly clear for this flight that day. And the plane took off normally from the airport without any problems. But a few hours after takeoff, a sudden explosion rocked the entire plane. Before anyone could understand anything, with a jolt, the roof of the first-class cabin was unrooted and separated from the plane. Passengers and cabin crew were horrified to see the open sky above their heads. Did the pressure of the air pull all the passengers out of the plane? Did the plane break into pieces mid-air? Was this plane able to make an emergency landing? Stay tuned to know more about this horrible accident in the aviation world. This Boeing 737-200 series aircraft was given to Aloha Airlines in 1969. Till now, this aircraft had completed a total of 35,496 hours of air travel. But in its service so far, this aircraft was mostly used for short distance travel, due to which this aircraft had taken off and landed more than 90,000 times. Due to its so many short distance flights, this aircraft had taken off and landed 3 times more than its prescribed limit. The plane had already made 3 trips from Honolulu to Hilo on the day of the accident. For its 4th flight that day, Flight 243 and 89 passengers and 6 crew members on board. Everything was operating normally at the airport, and the ground safety staff completed the external inspection of the aircraft. In its report, the safety staff did not mention any technical or body part defects in the aeroplane. Some time ago, this plane passed the Boeing service bulletin report as per its scheduled check. The flight was led by 44-year-old Captain Robert Skonsheimer, who had over 8,500 flight hours of skilled flying experience. 36-year-old First Officer Madeline Tompkins was appointed as co-pilot for this flight, who had over 3,500 hours of flying experience in this type of Boeing 737 planes. In total, both the pilots had more than 10,000 hours of flying experience in this type of Boeing 737 plane. Flight attendant Clarabelle Lansing was also aboard the flight along with other crew members. Slowly all the passengers started boarding the plane. Meanwhile, while passing through the boarding bridge, a passenger sees a crack in the outer fuselage of the plane and gets a little nervous. But thinking that maybe the airport staff would already know about it, she doesn't mention it to any flight crew or airport staff. After all the passengers completed boarding, the flight started its roll-off process at around 1 p.m. Flight 243 took off from Hilo International Airport at approximately 1:25 p.m. Following the flight route, the pilot initiates the climb to take the plane to its assigned altitude. As usually with every flight, it is mandatory for passengers to wear seatbelts after takeoff until the plane reaches its designated height. That's why all the passengers of Flight 243 were also wearing their seatbelts. Slowly increasing its height as soon as the plane reaches a height of 24,000 feet. Suddenly there is a loud explosion in the plane. The entire roof of the first-class cabin is unrooted and separated from the plane. After this sudden explosion, trying to control the plane, when the pilots look back, they are shocked. The cockpit door and the roof of the first-class cabin were ripped apart, and the pilot could see the open sky behind him. With the strong wind, pieces of the plane were flying here and there all over the cockpit. Seeing death in front of their eyes, the passengers of the first class cabin were swinging on their seats with the help of seat belts. With a speed of 300 miles per hour, the wind was trying to pull everything out of the plane. Due to the sudden decompression, a large portion of the left side of the plane was also broken and separated from the plane. Luckily, due to the seatbelt sign being on, all the passengers were wearing seatbelts and remained glued to their seats. But the cabin crew were not so lucky. Air hostess Clarabelle Lansing was desperately trying not to be pulled out of the plane by holding on to side panel. But unfortunately, the air pressure pulled Clarabelle Lansing out of the plane moments later. Another air hostess, Michelle Honda, was also slammed on the cabin floor by the gust of air pressure. But luckily, air hostess Michelle saved herself from being pulled out of the plane by holding on to the passenger seat. Fighting for life and death, barely holding on to the passenger seat, air hostess Michelle was still advising the passengers to remain calm and hold on to their seats. Terrified in the cockpit, the pilots were trying to control the plane, but soon they realized that many controls of the plane had failed. The plane was slowly getting out of their control at an altitude of 24,000 feet. Due to the gusts of wind, the plane starts to stagger rapidly. Due to cabin decompression and high speed of the plane, it had become difficult for the passengers to breathe. Normally, in the event of cabin decompression in the air, oxygen masks come out of the cabin ceiling to help passengers breathe. But here, the entire roof of the plane had blown away. Due to such strong wind and lack of oxygen, passengers could suffocate and die anytime. The first officer immediately sets the plane radio to the emergency frequency to make a mayday call to Honolulu airport and inform them of an emergency landing at the nearby Maui airport. But the wind noise in the cockpit was so loud that the Honolulu ATC controller could not understand anything. The noise was so high that the pilots could not hear each other's voice and were trying to communicate with each other using the hand gestures. Now the pilots took the decision to bring the plane down quickly. Without wasting any more time, the pilots start bringing the plane down quickly by lowering the nose of the plane. Pilots bring the plane down so fast that at one point the plane starts coming down at a speed of 4,100 feet per minute. Generally, passenger planes come down at speed of 3,000 feet per minute so that the pilots can control the plane and the plane does not crash. But the pilot had no other option but to bring the plane down quickly to save themselves and all the passengers from falling to death. Coming down rapidly, when the plane reaches an altitude of 14,000 feet, luckily the pilots are able to contact the emergency service center at Maui airport. They inform emergency services to keep the ambulance and fire brigade ready at the airport. Due to lack of oxygen, passengers in the first class cabin now start suffocating. But as the plane starts coming down from the height of 10,000 feet, the captain slowly down the speed of the plane so that the passengers could get some oxygen to breathe. Reducing the speed, the captain starts bringing the plane towards the runway. But while reducing the speed, as the plane reaches a speed of 195 miles per hour, the plane starts going out of control. Soon the pilots realize that they have to increase the speed of the plane if they want to avoid crashing. But getting the plane to land at such a high speed was also no less than a danger. To land safely, the plane usually has to land at a speed of 150 miles per hour. Pilots decide that it is better to land the plane at high speed than to crash. The captain tells the first officer Tompkins to lower the landing gear, after which the first officer immediately turns the landing gear knob down. But even after lowering the landing gear knob, the front landing gear light does not turn green, which shows the landing gear is not down. Seeing this, the captain immediately tries to bring down the landing gear manually. Despite repeated attempts, the landing gear light does not turn green. Usually in such situations, pilots can also check with the cockpit camera whether the landing gear is down or not. But unfortunately, the camera has also failed. Now the pilots had no way of knowing whether the front landing gear was down or not. The captain did not want to waste any more time and decide to land without knowing whether the front landing gear was down or not. If the front landing gear had not actually down and the plane had landed at such a speed, it would have surely crashed on the runway. Anyway, in these circumstances, the pilot had no other option. The pilots only wanted to land the plane at any cost. But luckily, the landing gear was already down and the green light was not coming on the control panel just because of a system fault. And after about 13 minutes of that explosion in the air, the plane was waving in the air at high speed, finally touches the runway. After running on the runway for some distance, the plane stopped safely. Along with the emergency services, none of the airport employees could believe their eyes as to how such a damaged plane could land safely. Out of 89 passengers aboard the plane, 65 passengers get hurt in this accident. Out of them, 8 passengers were seriously injured. Unfortunately, air hostess Clarabelle Lansing dies in this accident, and her body was never found. The plane was so badly damaged that there was no way to repair it. This incident was so horrifying and surprising that in the blink of an eye, its news spread all over the world, and its investigation was started immediately. The biggest question before the investigators was how the roof of heavy jet airplane was unrooted in the air and separated from the plane. Usually, the outer part of the airplane fuselage is made of 2.5 mm thick metal sheet. If you try to understand in simple language, then this thickness is much as if you put 2 credit cards on top of each other. These metal plates of length 4 meter and width of 2 meter are connected to each other with the help of metal rebates. That's why usually in such situations, the weakest place is on the side of the joint. And hence the first suspicion of the investigators goes towards these joint areas. After this, when the investigators investigate all the passengers, the same passengers who had seen the crack in the wall of the plane tell them about the crack in the outer fuselage. The place where the passenger tells about the crack, the investigators also suspected the crack at same place. Due to the strong air pressure at such a height, the roof of the plane was unrooted and separated from this crack. Now, the biggest question was that, despite the security check that happened a few days ago, why didn't any service inspector come to know about this crack in the plane? And it is revealed that this mistake happened because the airplane company wanted to minimize the expenses incurred in the usual service inspection. Therefore, according to rules of federal aviation, it was mandatory to check only the necessary places like the front part of the plane. It was up to the airline discretion if they want to check or not the other parts of the plane. However, this plane had spent 35,496 hours flying on such a sea route where the atmosphere was very moist and full of salt. Such weather is very dangerous for rusting any metal, but despite all this, Aloha Airlines did not consider it necessary to do regular and thorough checks of their planes. This horrific accident took place due to such huge human error during maintenance. The mistakes found in the investigation were so terrible and dangerous that the US government immediately gave instructions to change the entire maintenance processes. A new airworthiness task force was also formed whose main objective was to thoroughly check all the airplanes. During the investigation of this new team, if any defect was found in any one plane, then all the planes of the entire airline could be re-examined. This was a huge and important change in the airlines industry. But unfortunately, air hostess Clarabelle Lansing had to pay the price of it by giving her life. In this accident, along with the pilots, the entire cabin crew team had carried out their work very bravely, for which they were also honored with many bravery awards. If you liked our video, please encourage us by clicking on like and subscribe button. We are really grateful to you for your kind cooperation. Thanks a lot.